Following the deaths of 4 U.S. soldiers in Niger last month, people started to wonder why we had such a big military presence in Central Africa in the first place. Turns out America's military presence in Africa extends far beyond just Niger. It has expanded this year following Trump's April decision to grant new authorities to our military leaders in Africa. In Somalia alone, 29 airstrikes have been carried out this year to combat Islamic extremists, more than double what was carried out in 2016. Military personnel in Somalia have also more than doubled this year, from about 200 to 500. It's the largest American military presence in that country since the Black Hawk Down disaster in 1993, when 18 U.S. soldiers died. Now, Somalia is a war-torn country, and there seems to be an endless supply of bad guys there. But can America really patch things up? Let me bring in former CIA officer, host of Buck Sexton with America Now. It is Buck Sexton. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you.
What's going on in particularly Somalia, and why the increased presence there?
The Trump administration, I think, has seen what's gone on in Iraq and Syria as a template for what they're going to try to do against the affiliates of the Islamic State around the world going forward. Use local, on-the-ground allies, work within the political realities of the various tribes and factions and sectarian groups in the area, give them air cover, have a limited presence of U.S. Special Forces or Special Operations Command personnel who will be training, providing intelligence and other assistance as necessary, but let indigenous forces carry most of the fight. That has worked well in Iraq and Syria. Somalia, they are upping the airstrikes. This is where the Trumpian aspect of it, I think, comes into play even more. They're taking a more aggressive stance with those strikes. They also did this in Iraq and Syria, I should note. But that means that you will have an increase in casualties, and not just casualties of bad guys. But I think the administration's calculation is, look what happened in Iraq and Syria. We have 500,000 people dead in Syria. You have civil war there. In Iraq, tens of thousands killed, at a minimum hundreds of thousands wounded, displaced, injured, enslaved. And that was because there was insufficient action taken on the ground by, there was a U.S. presence and there were U.S. options at hand. So I think what they're trying to do is the anti-ISIS model from Iraq and Syria elsewhere around the world, and that means more airstrikes, and it means that we will have people in harm's way. That's right. Part of this, too.
They're putting the hammer down, for lack of a better phrase. What about, though, because it's the military operation, but that comes out of intelligence gathering. Do you have any sense, as a former CIA officer, the quality of the intelligence that we're getting in order to execute on some of these missions?
Well, you need it to be for counterinsurgency purposes, which is really what you're dealing with in the context of a place like Somalia. You need it to be granular. You need to really know down to the tribe and village level who the players are, good and bad, and that means that on-the-ground allies are absolutely essential, which brings me back to what the template is now. Look, we did go big in Iraq. We did go big in Afghanistan. For Bush and Obama's terms in office, Obama pulled down in Iraq, but actually surged in Afghanistan. I think there's a recognition that it's not ever going to be possible for us to build a country and want it more than the people who live in the country. We can't want it more than they do. So that's why using the forces on the ground in the case of Somalia, in Niger, we're working very closely. They mentioned the raid, the very unfortunate raid where we lost some U.S. Special Forces personnel killed, but they were working with indigenous forces there, too. We're using force multiplies, air cover, and our specialized operators, and in some places.
But ultimately, we see as a nation, and this sounds very simplistic, these terrorist-affiliated groups in these African countries as a threat to the United States security. Maybe not here at home, but overseas, that's a question rather than a statement.
Well, you look at a group like Al-Shabaab, and you look at Boko Haram in Nigeria, for example. These are two ISIS-affiliated groups, same ideology as Al-Qaeda. People get a little too into sometimes. I think the separations between these groups, they change. They're all working for the same thing, which is a global caliphate and the global jihad. But they have engaged in cross-border attacks. Al-Shabaab has gone into Kenya and been responsible for mass casualty incidents there. So we know that that's already on offering for them. That's something that they're trying to do. And I believe that one of the problems problems we've seen is that with, for example, the Obama administration, Iraq and Syria, they took a hands-off approach. They allowed the failed state to become the launch pad for jihadism. Right. And then it was our problem anyway. So Trump's team is looking at this problem set. And look, it's very, very complicated, and nobody can fix this easily, and no one has all the answers. But they're looking at the problem set of what's going on with jihadists in sub-Saharan Africa and saying, more now, even airstrikes that involve more casualties, which is something people need to be aware of. That will happen if you're taking a harder line. That prevents us from dealing with, okay, now there's a civil war in Somalia, which has been happening over the course of recent decades, but now there is a complete implosion and hundreds of thousands of people killed.